And we have another presentation from Yes. So we've moved from Scotland through to Sweden with a link to the US, and now we're moving completely to the US ecosystems. Yes, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Someone was planning this workshop very well. Yana talked about the Ohio. I'm speaking from Ohio, but my location is Columbus, Ohio, Central Ohio. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to present today, Drs. Prokop, Hagens, and Kitagawa. For this crowd, I don't think I need to explain much. There has been a surge of so-called entrepreneurship ecosystem studies, and so has been critiques. But the part I would like to engage today is the second part, that evolution of an ecosystem is not well understood. This is a great workshop that I can see all the great scholars that I want to cite. Ben is here, Colin is here, and Yana just presented. And thanks, Christina, for sharing the link with the ERD special issue last week. There are a few studies about evolution, such as by Magda Meyer about Phoenix, Arizona, and Colin Bailey about the role of anchor institutions, and Schaefer and Heng about the role of migrants. And I'm glad to see more presentations about evolution in this workshop. But let's get to the bottom line of why evolution has been studied little. I think it's primarily a methodological challenge. Most ecosystem studies use qualitative interviews and try to reconstruct individual and institutional memory. But people move, different positions and different even organizations every few years. And it's not so easy to reconstruct the institutional memory. And even if people stay in the same organization, asking the precise memory of 10 years ago, 20 years ago is not an easy thing. And there are some exceptions, but most interviews usually last for an hour or so. Michaela mentioned 75 minutes, which is great. But that's just about enough to cover how things are doing now, not enough to cover the past of a long time. In contrast, some quantitative studies can identify some data over time, such as venture capital investment, some of the company's establishment and growth, human capital, number of support organizations, and their founded years. But it's difficult to demonstrate interconnectedness and system change. So you have to conduct basically 2 case studies to understand how things changed. My collaborators published a few things about the St. Louis, and the time frame back then was 2012 to 13. And in my new approach, I have been interviewing support organizations in St. Louis again, and I'm having intentional stratifying sampling. So far, 6 people from those stayed in the same organizations. 3 people who came to the organization, but from different positions or even new to St. Louis. 3 people who left their positions and started in completely different places. We also have survey results from the Arch Grant recipients. Arch Grants I will explain just in a few minutes. This was also supplemented by some other pretty important sources. And basically I was asking, what kind of support do you provide? How is the entrepreneurship ecosystem or system in St. Louis now, and how is it different from the past? Just a quick recap of St. Louis, Missouri. It's a metropolitan area of about 2.8 million population, 20th in the US. The city is famous for its arch, which symbols the gateway to Wild West that Lewis and Clark departed. Now it is basically a mid-sized city in the Midwest US. And very quickly, so in our past studies, we were finding that the St. Louis ecosystem in early 20-teens, they have launched Arch Grants in 2012, which was creating a peer-based learning. And there has been an emerging number of entrepreneurship support organizations, ESOs, which was creating events and programs for collisions. Overall, there was a high energy and optimism. let's jump to the main findings. And so there was a good number of support organizations earlier, 10 years ago. However, as you see on the right-hand side, and there has been even more densification of support organizations, most notably by accelerators, venture capitals, and co-working spaces. Back in 2012, left-hand side, there are only 3 accelerators in town, Capital Innovators, 630, and BioSTL. And I'm usually okay with math, but I'm having a little challenge here today. So the 630, they created a new branch accelerator called the 630 Cyber. So let's call it, there are 6.5 accelerators in town. And in terms of venture capitals, there used to be 4 in the past. The first one, Regional Growth Capital, is now defunct, but there are 8 more venture capitals. So investors know that they can make money in centers and are very keen on them. So Arch Grants is a competition-based grant program and provides a small $50,000 to 20 companies per year with an intention to create a cohort of entrepreneurs. It's a case that a small and steady can make a difference over time. So 20 companies per cohort, and by now 9 years, 175 companies were generated out of this program, which in total created almost 2,000 employment and $400 million in revenue. There's a nice bridging happening as some of these recipients, after 1 or a few years, successfully scale up and receive a larger venture capital investment. So per cohort, it's happening about 1 to 4 companies per year. They have attracted additional almost $300 million in investment. And this is not happening just because those companies are working hard, but it's a very strategic and intentional development by Arch Grants to include investors in their board and advisory councils. So of the 16 board members, 5 of them are investors, and they have a 14 different advisory council board, and there are 5 investors there as well. So this is, they intend to make their program reflecting investors' viewpoints and can connect the recipient companies to investors more effectively. Findings 1.5, another a little math challenge here, but with the densification of support organizations, some people describe that this is a professionalization of support services. Another person said that we moved from free mentoring services, now superseded by accelerators. So accelerators and venture capitals can support companies in certain stages. But there is still lack of a very early stage, such as ideation and validation stage. And this is not the situation in which the more support organizations, the better it is necessarily. More support organizations also means crowding out and restructuring of existing organizations. One support organization, they had to decrease the staff from 7 to 3 as there are only limited grants in the regions and there's just more competition for the grants. YMC stands for 1 Million Cups, a weekly meetup program. Regional Growth Capital, I mentioned the venture capital, now longer defunct. Gateway VMS is a mentoring service. Start Lois is another meetup program. These are no longer functioning or have substantially scaled down their activities. And here's result of the survey by Arch Grant recipients. After 1 year receiving the grant, they were asked which support organizations they have used. And I have been kind of color coding for blue for decreased support organizations, and yellow cream is for the increased ones. And as you see, there have been some variation, but a good number of organizations that these Arch Grant recipients no longer will be using, or number has decreased. The same data for the universities. There are 9 local universities mentioned in the survey, and something is going on in this 2019 cohort, but in general, you see a pattern of about the more use of universities by Arch grant recipients in earlier years, like up to 2014, but then becomes smaller over time. Findings number 2, there's an emergence of big hits and external validations. There have been 2 billion-dollar scale successful exits. One is Varsity Tutors. They've been doing very well because of partly because of the COVID situation, because of online tutoring has increased. There's another company called the Gainsight that was acquired by 1.1 billion, both last year. There are some outside players come to St. Louis, and many people use it as the validation of the success of the St. Louis. CIC stands for Cambridge Innovation Center, not based in Cambridge, UK, but Cambridge, Massachusetts. They opened a second branch in St. Louis. It's kind of like a co-working space in 2014. Kovo is a co-working space based in San Francisco. And more external validation happens as so far 7 Arch grant recipients attended Techstars, the original and prestigious accelerator based in Boulder, Colorado. Findings number 3, this densification happens with some of branching out and niche orientation at the organizational and regional level. I mentioned these 6 or 6.5 accelerators, and I like to list their focus areas, and they are quite different. The capital innovators support general IT companies, but they later added consumer tech companies and consumer products companies and energy sector companies. This 630 cyber is clearly a cybersecurity. The other one supports the biohealth sector. Amarin is an energy-focused sector accelerator. Stadia is a sports-related venture accelerator. ULab is a so-called agtech or agriculture-related. Findings 3.5. So additionally, this niche orientation happens with some alignment with local industries and specific pockets in the region. Here's a map of St. Louis, here's the Mississippi River, and here is downtown and the Gateway Arch. So in the downtown area, T-Rex is a major incubator / co-working space opened in 2012. Now they are trying to align with one of the big anchor companies in the area, National Geospatial Agencies, and try to support data analytics, GIS kind of related technologies. Cortex, and along with the CIC in Midtown, there are many support organizations and companies related to biohealth areas. And in the Northwest, 39 North, another co-working space is located right next to the Danforth Center, which is not the university, but the major research center for agriculture, plant science technologies. So quickly summing up, the densification of support happens, especially by for-profit organizations such as accelerators, co-working space, and venture capitals. This forces a crowding out of support organizations, particularly some non-profit organizations. And let's keep in mind that many support organizations are small, only with a few staff. They are grant dependent, and their leadership change every few years. So you see quite a bit of changes over time. There has been a shift of focus from startup to scale up. More like a little later stage thing is happening. However, it may be happening, the whole like a frenzy focus may be happening with almost a neglect of the very early stage. As the startup ecosystem is gaining the local recognition as well as the external validations through Arch grants, some big exits, and more investment money coming in by venture capitals. And these venture capitals, actually, money come from externally as well as some of the old local money, like real estate based or some other different businesses based, may be converted into venture capital money. there's a niche and alignment with the local industries. But at the same time, it has not been so clear to me that how large companies, they say they want to support startup companies, but how exactly they want to promote entrepreneurship. And I'm a little suspicious that they are more interested in buying out new technologies, business ideas, talent, and possibly companies. This is all to say that the landscape may change significantly in a matter of 10 years. So the ecosystem in a way is still thriving. And within 10 years, I could not say that it is maturing or like flattening yet. Last slide, policy implications. Government continuity will help, or restructuring will be even more significant. There was state-level administration change. Basically, Democrat governor was replaced by a Republican governor, and the support, like state budget in some of the sectors, were reduced substantially. MTCs and Missouri Technology Corporations, they used to provide about $10 million in grants for economic development, but more like a startup purposes. That has decreased to only 3 million by 2020. And this really affected several organizations. Arch Grants was receiving $500,000 in 2016 and 17, but it became zero from 2018. They could successfully fundraise from other sources, but some other nonprofits, they were up to 50% of budget dependent on MTC grants, and they had to scale down or restructure very substantially. There was a scandal at the county level. So there was, which was reorganizing like entire local chambers, development agencies. So there have been some talks about co-investment by some of these multiple agencies, but it kind of jeopardizes startup companies. Will not be looking at these organizations at all. And universities' involvement in a way may decrease, but in some different roles that university can still play a very important talent source. It's a little quick, but like to stop here, and we'll appreciate any questions and comments.
Thank you. Yes, a very interesting presentation and a nice follow-up on Jana's presentation. That relates to Ohio, and in this case, St. Louis, a very interesting ecosystem. Do we have questions? Yes, I have one related to the evolution of these actors, because you showed some really interesting aspects when suddenly we have more business incubator kind of actors, support infrastructures, and venture capitalists suddenly appearing. I don't think I observed it from your presentation, but have they emerged from from within St. Louis, or have they been in a way imports from other regions?
So venture capitals, some of them within St. Louis, but some other external venture capitals came to St. Louis and established like a significant investing presence.
Thank you.
And accelerators, actually, I think almost all of them are the locally kind of made.
Thank you. We have Christina.
Thank you very much for the great presentation. I was listening very excited. You raised a very important topic, for example, issue. Earlier, Michaela was saying that in the chat that not all the universities have an entrepreneurial focus or contribute to entrepreneurial ecosystem. And from what I see, this is the same issue for regions. Not all the regions want to build an entrepreneurial ecosystem. And also what you were raising is that building an entrepreneurial ecosystem and the evolution, it's a long-term strategy, and you can make this shift in a 10-year period. I was wondering because I was exploring the Indiana ecosystem, the North and the South, and with these different differences between the South and the North. The North want to be more entrepreneurial, the South don't want to be entrepreneurial at all. And I was wondering, do you believe that because people changes, organization changes, do cities can evolve in become entrepreneurial in a long-term period, or some cities stays not that entrepreneurial?
No, great question. That may be a question. Maybe 10 or 20 years later, ask me the same question, and maybe I can answer a little bit better. But my impression is, so St. Louis before 2010, let's say that more like a local culture was it's a big corporation cities. That there are several big companies, Bosch beer company, there was a big telecom company, and Boeing still has a very significant presence. And St. Louis population has been decreasing since 1950s, and every time people are thinking, well, big companies will save us, they will create more jobs. That was the mentality of the region. However, like by 2000, people finally realizing that, like, wait a minute, after so many decades, they are not saving us. We have to do something else. And that's how they, like 4 civic leaders came up, and they put their own money and created arch grants to like let's shift to new companies and our like locally grown companies, and we have to completely change the economic strategy. So in that sense, that was the beginning, and I think people understand it now. And, in a way, this entrepreneurship community is more accepted in the region. So maybe over time, yes, I'm hoping that more people, think about the entrepreneur.
Thank you. And we have one question from a chat from Christopher. Christopher, do you want to ask the question?
Yes, sure. Thank you. It's for Yasuyuki. I'm very familiar with the Northeast Ohio scenario and the Swedish effect and so forth that Jana was talking about. And I would say that the success of Northeast Ohio in terms of funding was a decision made by the altruistic funders in Ohio to band together to fund bigger projects. And surprisingly, they agreed to what is called the Greenfield Fund, where there was a commitment for 10 years, which meant that any spin-outs from the fund, the money from that went back into the fund to fund more innovation and entrepreneurship. They extended that after 10 years for a further 10 years. And you can now see the seeds of that investment come through in terms of the MedTech corridor and the impact of Cleveland Clinic along with Case Western and so on. So has that been repeated in other places in Ohio?
Good question. And being in Ohio, it's great that you know so much about US and Ohio. I didn't know about this Greenfield Fund. So it's a little hard for me to comment on this. But I think there are multiple cases that there are some local philanthropic efforts to convert, some of the extremely successful business people will dedicate their money, and that will be primarily used for the entrepreneurship or startup purposes. It has happened in Kansas City, and I used to work at the nonprofit foundation called the Kaufman Foundation, and that was made by Mr. Kaufman, who made a fortune by making his own, basically a pharmaceutical company, and he wanted to help startup entrepreneurs. So, that kind of cases can happen at some different places.
It's worth actually looking at what happened, because they've now got, I think, about a 15 to 20 year record. And it came about, if you're not familiar with Ohio, in the 1950s, Ohio was the #1 city in America for business, primarily around the steel production. In the 1990s, it was bottom of the league table for innovation. So that was a wake-up call, and that's why they made these changes, and they've been very successful. And I would say that going back to Jana's speech, that in Lund, there was a Swedish investor called the Paulson Foundation, which actually saved a lot of the AstraZeneca facilities that were shut down and enabled that to be converted to Medican Village. And there's a strong relationship between that and Uppsala and the Karolinska Institute and so forth in Sweden, and also in Copenhagen, because they're quite close. And that message can be translated into Ohio as well. And if you look at going way, way back to the impacts of Silicon Valley and so forth, there are a lot of commonalities there, but it proves once again that you can put the same facilities into one place and it doesn't work as good as another place. And that's a conundrum for entrepreneurial ecosystems to solve.
Thank you. Thank you, Yes. Thank you, everyone, for your comments and for participation. I will let Fumi conclude our session, and then we will move on to a short break and to our networking session.
For the speakers and all the comments, discussions, and thanks Dan for the sharing. So just kind of really quickly, I'm not doing any conclusion, but I'll just advertise next week. So next week is the final workshop, workshop 5, and please note that we will start in the morning at 10 a.m. and it's called Entrepreneurial Ecosystems, Concepts and Measurement. And I see Richard Harrison today online. He's going to be one of the speakers talking about entrepreneurial ecosystem metaphor, unpacking. And then we also have speakers from Australia, a few Australian speakers, Martin Ovskonka and Alan O'Connor. And then we have some Japanese talk, one from Agata Kapturkiewicz, who's not Japanese, but she's based in Tokyo, and also Professor Hiroyuki Okamura from Hitotsubashi University in Tokyo. So we're going to have quite a variety of geography and perspective next week, and please join the final session, workshop 5. And we've also created a LinkedIn, and quite a few people joined already. Thanks for that. And Christina put some interesting special issues and workshop information. So please do share, when your book comes out or article comes out, or if you're organizing something interesting, if you want to share the information, please post your information. That would be great. Okay, so that's for the workshop 4. So thanks everyone, and particularly